Hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Shout About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. It's Doctor Who Sunday. This is part 3 of the review for the War Games. Today we are looking at the pacing for it. Let's remind ourselves very, very quickly of the story. The Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe land in the zone of World War One, no man's land. They are quickly captured and they get court-martialed. They think they are in the normal war zone, but later they discover that they are not, and they start looking into it. They find out that the warlords are playing games and pulling warriors from different time zones in order to conquer the universe. The Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe team up with other warriors that have also fought off their processing in order to put a stop to it. However, the Doctor soon discovers that he can't fix it by himself and he calls upon the Time Lords. The Time Lords then take the Doctor prisoner and put him on trial. He is found guilty and sent into exile and forced to regenerate. So, I'm going to be very honest now. I think the story is way too long. This is one of my biggest gripes with the actual story itself. I think that by the time they got to the key to time and the trial of the Time Lord, they realized it's actually easiest to go with an overarching plot that is sort of the main sort of like thing with the mini stories in between. And that's often quite a device that is used today as well. Now, they could have done it with the war games. For example, they could have had it all set in the games as we have it, but had mini stories within each or some of the war zones instead of one long, complicated plot with the reveal of the warlord happening a lot earlier. I wrote in my notes that by episode 8, I'm starting to feel the length of the actual plot. I feel like the plot could have actually been consolidated down into the 8 episodes and the story would still have been completely fine. There is a good 4 stories where we see them doing the same thing over and over again with the military episodes. The Doctor, Zoe, and Jamie being captured, then being court-martialed to escape, and then have to have it happen all over again, and perhaps in a slightly different format than the one before. And I think it should have gone land in World War One zone, have 2 stories in World War One zone, and go into the Roman War zone and have 2 stories with them, rather than having them go back to the World War One on the German side zone. The overarching plot part could have actually been that the warlords were running these games. Well, I think in general it was anyway, but I think that they could have had this running from almost the very beginning, possibly even. Now, Doctor Who thrived on actually educating youngsters back then, so I think by spending too long in one war zone, they actually truly missed the chance to educate about other wars too. And this could have made the plot feel a lot quicker had they actually gone down that route and prompt with the differences in the history before adding the sci-fi. Now, I know I've already said it, but the warlord should have been introduced earlier too. I feel like that would have helped with the pacing of the story. There's a lot of talk about him prior to this, but there's no real shock factor when he is actually introduced, and the Doctor Who is actually very good at doing the shock factor. The Warlord adds a dynamic to the War Chief, so if he was introduced earlier, then we could have seen more of that dynamic actually play out and wonder who he actually was. Maybe there we see a more of a double cross or whatever. I don't know how they could have done it, but I feel like the introduction of the warlord would have actually sped the story up, made it a little bit more interesting than what it actually already is. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a very good story. I really do like it. There was just a lot of filler in between sometimes. And I think it was the earliest version of running down a corridor that we actually got. I do think, however, them getting into the time machines in episode 4 was just about right. But do they spend too long with the war chief and the warlord? I'm not really sure. Now, as someone who is more interested in the history of with Doctor Who compared to the sci-fi, I want to say yes, but at the time, I also feel like it's a no. At the same time, excuse me. as I feel like the majority of the war games actually takes place in the historical setting overall. There were also characters who were not in it for long enough, in my opinion. For example, Harper, I mentioned him earlier, a very intelligent, underrated character that has a very charming and I also think underrated actor, Rudolph Walker. I don't know exactly what they would have done with the character, but I think because they wrote out Lady Jennifer just after that, he could have actually taken her place for sure. Now, I think that part of the pacing issues with this is representative of what was actually happening at the time. I had a look into it as I wondered if there was something that actually could have easily affected it. It would appear that discrepancies had arisen in that time, and it was due to the fact that there was dislike for Malcolm Holt's stories and, you know, Derek Sherwin's stories. So they made a decision because they couldn't decide on the stories to put the last 10 remaining episodes into one block instead of breaking them into, I think it was like something like two. And in order to prevent the story from losing its momentum, they added the war zones. And also at the time, they had, in addition of Patrick choosing to leave, Frasier's contract was actually expiring. And the fact that Wendy had also decided to leave at the end of the war games, they couldn't convince her to stay for Series 7. Plus, they also had the suggestion from Derek Sherwin to actually introduce the Time Lords into the story as well. There was also a very unusual decision of writing the first 5 parts before writing the conclusion of a story. Normally, every author that I've spoken to at least has the end goal already in mind, but they didn't do that with the war games. Now, the added zones, I actually feel, didn't slow the momentum down per se, but I think they should have played with the zones more in the story, especially if they were writing 5 episodes without fully knowing its conclusion. It may have added some interest in the instead of the constantly being captured and breaking out storyline theme that they had going on. But one thing I will say is this story, it's not 12 parts, and I have no idea what I'm going to do when I get to that particular story. Maybe the same as what I've done here, who knows, but I will figure it out. That's what I think. Let me know what you think. Now, next week's Doctor Who Sunday will actually be all 3 of these reviews into one video because originally that's what you as the subscribers wanted, but unfortunately I had a massive time constraint on me, so I had to break it down. I had no choice, and it took me 5 hours just to write the scripts for 3 videos alone without any of the proof checking that was going on that I had to do after. And of course, I had to watch the war games on top of that, which is probably around about the same sort of time. So apologies that I couldn't actually release it in one video. But if I actually do that for next week, it will actually give me time to actually prepare for the Arc of Infinity, which will be the next one. Let me know what you think. Chat about it, don't shout about it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.